was relaxing far from home when, at 2 in the morning, the alarm in my apartment went off. The security guard called. "Your son-in-law is here. He says he's the new owner." I just smiled and said, "Let him in. He's about to get a surprise. I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The phone rang at exactly 2 in the morning, cutting through the silence of my hotel room like a knife. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I'd been expecting this call for weeks. "Mr. Harrison, this is Marcus from Secure Watch Security. Your apartment alarm just went off." His voice carried that professional urgency security guards use when they're not quite sure if they should be worried or annoyed. I sat up slowly, my 63-year-old joints protesting after the long day of travel. I was 300 miles away from home, visiting my sister Margaret in Denver, but my mind was sharp and ready for what was coming. "What's the situation, Marcus?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, sir, there's a man here at your door, says his name is Alan Morrison. Claims he's the new owner of the apartment and that you gave him the keys." Marcus paused and I could hear muffled voices in the background. "He's got some paperwork with him, but our protocol is to call you first." Alan Morrison, my son-in-law of 5 years, married to my only daughter, Lucy. The man who had spent the last 18 months slowly, methodically, trying to convince everyone that I was losing my mind. A smile spread across my face in the darkness of that hotel room. Not a pleasant smile, but the kind that comes when you finally see a trap you've been setting for months about to spring shut. "Let him in, Marcus," I said calmly, "but keep monitoring the situation closely. And Marcus, make sure all the security cameras are recording everything." "Are you sure, sir? He doesn't have keys and the paperwork looks, well, it looks hastily prepared." "I'm absolutely certain. He's about to get quite a surprise." After hanging up, I didn't try to go back to sleep. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the security system's live feed. The apartment I'd called home for 22 years appeared on my screen in grainy black and white. 22 years since my late wife Eleanor and I had bought that place with our life savings. 22 years of memories, laughter, tears, and love. Now I watched as Alan walked through my front door like he owned it. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed he'd finally gotten away with something. At 34, Alan was tall and lean, with the kind of practiced charm that had initially fooled me when Lucy first brought him home. He'd seemed perfect for her, attentive, ambitious, well-dressed. It took me nearly 2 years to see through the facade. I watched him stride into my living room, his eyes scanning everything with the calculating gaze of an appraiser. He walked over to Eleanor's antique china cabinet, the one that had belonged to her grandmother. His fingers traced the glass doors, and I could practically see the dollar signs in his eyes. "Careful with that," I whispered to the screen, knowing he couldn't hear me. The real tragedy wasn't Alan's greed. I'd dealt with greedy people before in my 40 years as a small business owner. The real tragedy was watching what he'd done to my Lucy. My daughter had always been strong-willed and independent. After her mother died 6 years ago, Lucy had been my rock. She helped me through the darkest period of my life, making sure I ate, making sure I didn't isolate myself completely. She was studying to become a nurse, working part-time at the local hospital, building a life she could be proud of. Then she met Alan at a hospital fundraiser where he was working as an event coordinator. Within 6 months, she'd dropped out of nursing school. Within a year, she'd moved in with him. By the time they married, she was completely financially dependent on him, and somehow he'd convinced her that was exactly where she belonged. The changes were gradual at first. Lucy stopped calling as often. When she did visit, Alan was always with her, steering conversations away from her own interests and toward what he thought was important. He had opinions about everything: my health, my finances, my living situation, my inability to accept that I was getting older. The real turning point came about 18 months ago. I'd invited them over for Sunday dinner, something we'd done regularly since Eleanor passed. Lucy seemed distant that day, distracted. Alan, on the other hand, was unusually talkative. "Peter," he'd said, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision, "Lucy and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you living alone in this big apartment." I'd set down my fork carefully. "Concerned how?" "Well, you're 62 now," he'd continued, as if that made me ancient. "This place is a lot to maintain. All these stairs, the old electrical system, the upkeep costs. And honestly, we've noticed you seem a bit forgetful lately." That word, forgetful, had been delivered with such casual cruelty that it took my breath away. I looked at Lucy, waiting for her to defend me, to tell Alan he was wrong. Instead, she nodded along, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Maybe Alan's right, Dad. Maybe it's time to think about simplifying things. Simplifying. As if my life, my independence, my connection to Eleanor's memory could be simplified down to whatever made Alan Morrison more comfortable. That's when I knew I had to be very, very careful. Over the following months, their visits became more frequent and more pointed. Alan would arrive with pamphlets for senior living communities, talking about how much peace of mind it would give everyone if I were somewhere with proper supervision. Lucy would chime in with stories about elderly people she'd heard about, always hypothetical, always cautionary tales about old folks who'd fallen, or forgotten to turn off the stove, or been taken advantage of by unscrupulous contractors. They started showing up unannounced, claiming they wanted to check on me. Alan would walk through the apartment like he was conducting an inspection, noting things that needed repair, questioning whether I was keeping up with the cleaning, commenting on expired food in my refrigerator. The final straw came 3 months ago when I caught Alan going through my desk drawers while Lucy distracted me in the kitchen. When I confronted him, he claimed he was just looking for a pen and seemed genuinely puzzled by my anger. That night, after they left, I sat in Eleanor's chair, the same chair where she'd spent her last months reading mystery novels and watching her birds at the feeder outside our window, and I made a decision. If Alan Morrison wanted to play games with my mind, I'd give him a game he'd never forget. I started small. I'd repeat myself occasionally during conversations, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. I'd ask the same question twice in a phone call with Lucy. I'd pretend to forget appointments or mix up dates. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would actually interfere with my life, but enough to make Alan think his psychological campaign was working. And all the while, I was documenting everything. Every conversation, every visit, every subtle manipulation. I installed new security cameras throughout the apartment, better ones than Alan knew about. I started recording our phone calls. I kept detailed notes about everything they said and did. Most importantly, I started making some very strategic legal arrangements. Now, watching Alan prowl through my apartment at 2 in the morning, I felt a grim satisfaction. He thought he was finally claiming his prize. He had no idea that everything he thought he knew was about to crumble around him. On my laptop screen, I watched him pull out his phone and make a call. Even without audio, I could read his body language. Excited, triumphant, probably calling Lucy to tell her the plan was working. What Alan didn't know was that tomorrow morning, he was going to discover that some games have consequences he never saw coming. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the security feed. Alan moved through my apartment with the casual entitlement of someone who believed it already belonged to him. He opened cabinets, examined my father's war medals on the mantel, even had the audacity to sit in Eleanor's chair and put his feet up on our coffee table. Each movement felt like a violation, but I forced myself to stay calm and keep watching. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Alan revealing his true nature when he thought no one was looking. He stood up and walked into my bedroom, disappearing from the living room camera's view. I switched to the bedroom feed and watched him open my dresser drawers, rifling through personal items that no decent person would touch. He found the small jewelry box where I kept Eleanor's wedding ring and a few pieces that had been her mother's. His fingers lingered on them, and I had to grip the edge of the hotel desk to keep from calling the police right then and there. But I needed him to go further. I needed him to commit to whatever plan he and Lucy had cooked up. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lucy. "Dad, Alan said he had to stop by your place for something. Hope that's okay. See you when you get back from Aunt Margaret's." Even now, she was covering for him. Even now, she was helping him lie to me. I remembered when Lucy used to tell me everything. After Eleanor died, we'd grown closer than we'd ever been. She'd come over twice a week, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. We'd sit in the kitchen, and she'd tell me about her nursing classes, about difficult patients, about her dreams of maybe working in pediatric care someday. She'd been 26 then, smart and driven, with her mother's compassion and my stubborn determination. I'd been so proud of her. Even in my grief, watching Lucy build her own life had given me hope that Eleanor and I had raised someone who would make a real difference in the world. The change didn't happen overnight. It was more like watching a flower wilt, so gradual that you don't notice it, until one day you realize what you're looking at is completely different from what was there before. Alan had been working at Morrison Events, his family's business, when they met. The Morrisons were well known in our city. They organized all the big charity galas and corporate functions. Alan presented himself as someone who was building something important, someone with connections and ambitions. What I didn't learn until much later was that Morrison Events was hemorrhaging money. Alan's father had been battling cancer for 2 years, and the medical bills combined with Alan's poor business decisions had nearly bankrupted them. By the time Alan married Lucy, he was desperately looking for a way to save himself financially. I should have seen it sooner. The way he always steered conversations toward money, how he'd casually ask about my retirement savings or property values in the neighborhood, the time he offered to help me organize my financial documents and seemed genuinely annoyed when I declined. But love makes people blind, and Lucy was deeply in love. She saw his attention as devotion, his need to control everything as protection. When he suggested she didn't need to finish nursing school because he could support both of them, she saw it as romantic. When he gradually isolated her from her old friends, she saw it as them building a life together. I tried to talk to her about it once, about 6 months after their wedding. She'd come over alone for the first time in weeks, and I thought maybe I could reach her. "Lucy, sweetheart," I'd said as we sat at the kitchen table. "Are you happy?" She'd looked at me with surprise. "Of course I'm happy, Dad. Why would you ask that? It's just, you seem different lately, more stressed, and I hardly see you anymore without Alan." Her face had hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Alan loves me, Dad. He takes care of me. Maybe you're just not used to sharing me with someone else." That stung, but I pushed forward. "I'm not trying to share you, Lucy. I just want to make sure you're living your own life, not just the life he wants for you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, you used to have dreams. You wanted to help people, to make a difference. What happened to nursing school?" She'd stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Alan thinks I'd be happier focusing on our family. He's probably right. Nursing is stressful and the hours are terrible. This way, I can be there for him. But what about what you want? I want what Alan wants. That's what marriage is, Dad. Maybe if you understood that better, Mom wouldn't have spent so many nights crying in the bathroom." The cruelty of that statement had hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor had suffered from depression in her later years, something we'd worked through together with counseling and medication. It had never been a secret, but it also wasn't something to be weaponized in an argument. Lucy had immediately looked stricken, as if she couldn't believe those words had come out of her mouth. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I'd said quietly. "And now I know where you learned to talk like that." She'd left without another word, and our relationship had never quite recovered. Alan had started joining her for every visit after that, and gradually their visits became less frequent and more focused on their concerns about my declining condition. Looking back, I think that was when Alan realized he could turn Lucy into a weapon against me. If he could convince her that I was becoming unreliable, maybe even dangerous to myself, then she'd support whatever steps he thought were necessary to help me. On the security feed, Alan had moved to my home office. I watched him sit at my desk and start going through the drawers systematically. He found my checkbook and spent several minutes photographing checks and account information with his phone. Then he found the folder where I kept documents related to the apartment, the deed, insurance papers, tax records. This was it. This was what he'd really come for. I watched him photograph everything, his movements quick and efficient. He wasn't just snooping. He was gathering intelligence, building a case for whatever legal maneuver he and Lucy had planned. What Alan didn't know was that those documents were worthless. The real paperwork, the documents that actually mattered, were safely locked away in a place he'd never think to look. My phone rang again. This time it was Alan himself. "Peter? Hey, sorry to bother you so late." His voice was smooth, concerned, the perfect performance of a worried son-in-law. "I know you're visiting Margaret, but I had to stop by your place to grab something Lucy left there last week. I hope that's okay." "Of course," I said, matching his fake concern with my own. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "Actually, I'm a little worried about something. When I was getting Lucy's things from the guest room, I noticed some papers scattered around your office. It looks like maybe you were trying to organize some financial documents but got confused." "There are bank statements and property papers just lying all over the desk." I almost laughed. He was good, setting up his story, planting the seeds of doubt about my mental state, creating a narrative that would support whatever came next. "Oh dear," I said, injecting just the right amount of uncertainty into my voice. I was trying to sort through some old paperwork before I left for Margaret's. Maybe I didn't finish cleaning up. "No worries, Peter. These things happen. But maybe when you get back, we should sit down and help you get organized. Lucy and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider getting you some help with managing your affairs. Just to take the stress off your shoulders." There it was, the trap he thought he was setting for me. "That's very thoughtful of you, Alan. We can definitely talk about it when I get home." "Great. Oh, and Peter, I went ahead and straightened up the papers for you, just to help out." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my hotel room and thought about Eleanor. She'd always been a better judge of character than me. I wondered what she would have thought about Alan, whether she would have seen through him sooner than I did, but I also thought about what she would have wanted me to do about Lucy. Eleanor had loved our daughter fiercely, protectively. She would have wanted me to save Lucy from Alan's manipulation, no matter what it cost me. The problem was, some people can only be saved after they're ready to save themselves, and Lucy wasn't ready yet. She still believed that Alan loved her, that his control was protection, that his isolation was intimacy. But she was about to learn the truth about the man she'd married. And when she did, I'd be ready to help her pick up the pieces, if she wanted my help. For now, though, I had to focus on protecting what was mine, and making sure Alan Morrison learned that some games have consequences he never saw coming. I returned home from Margaret's house 3 days later, carrying a small overnight bag and the weight of what I was about to unleash. Alan's midnight visit had been exactly the confirmation I needed. Now it was time to let him think his plan was working perfectly. The apartment felt different when I walked in, even though Alan had been careful to put everything back where he'd found it. But I knew my home too well. The slight angle of a picture frame, the way my desk chair was positioned, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in my office. He'd been thorough, but not invisible. My phone rang within an hour of my return. Lucy's voice was bright, almost aggressively cheerful. "Dad, how was your trip? Did you have a good time with Aunt Margaret?" "It was lovely, sweetheart. She sends her love." I kept my voice warm but slightly tired, playing the part of an aging man who might be just a little overwhelmed by travel. "Listen, Alan and I were wondering if we could come over tonight for dinner. We missed you while you were gone, and Alan mentioned he was a little concerned about some things he noticed when he stopped by." There it was, phase 2 of their plan. "Of course, I'd love to see you both, though I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit scattered since I got back. Travel takes more out of me than it used to." I could practically hear her exchanging glances with Alan. "That's exactly what we wanted to talk to you about, Dad. We think it might be time to look into getting you some help around the house. Just small things, you know? Maybe someone to help with organizing and keeping track of appointments." "Help," the word they were using instead of control. "That sounds reasonable," I said, injecting just enough uncertainty into my voice, "though I'm not sure I can afford much extra expense right now." Another pause. "We can talk about that tonight. Alan has some ideas that might help." After we hung up, I walked through my apartment one more time, seeing it as Alan saw it, as an asset to be acquired, a problem to be solved, an obstacle between him and financial security. But he had no idea what he was really walking into. The truth was, I'd known about Alan's plan for 3 months. Not suspected, known. Because unlike Alan, I was actually good at gathering information. It started when I hired a private investigator named Sarah Chen. She was recommended by my lawyer, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in elder fraud. I'd told her I suspected my son-in-law was planning something, but I wasn't sure what. What Sarah uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Morrison Events was $600,000 in debt. Alan had been borrowing money against future contracts that didn't exist, paying current expenses with money meant for future events. His father's cancer treatment had drained their savings, but Alan's poor management had made everything worse. More damaging was what Sarah found about Alan's relationship with my Lucy. He'd been seeing another woman, a wealthy widow named Patricia Kensington, for 8 months. Patricia was 72 years old and worth approximately $3 million. Alan was playing both sides, keeping Lucy as his legal wife while courting Patricia as his potential financial savior. But the most shocking discovery was the forged power of attorney documents. Sarah had followed Alan to a small law office in a strip mall across town. The lawyer, Dennis Garrett, was barely hanging on to his license after multiple ethics violations. For $5,000, Garrett had prepared documents that would give Alan complete control over my finances and property, documents that claimed I'd signed them willingly due to my declining mental capacity. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. First, establish a pattern of behavior that suggested I was becoming incompetent. Then, present the forged documents as something I'd signed during a moment of clarity, recognizing that I needed help. Finally, use those documents to sell my apartment and transfer my assets into accounts that Alan could access. What Alan didn't know was that I'd been recording him for months. My apartment wasn't just protected by the security cameras he knew about. I'd had Sarah's team install tiny recording devices throughout the space, in picture frames, inside lamp bases, even in the pen holder on my desk. Every conversation we'd had in my home for the past 3 months was documented. I also had photographs of Alan with Patricia Kensington, bank records showing his debts, and copies of the forged documents that Dennis Garrett's paralegal had been careless enough to leave in a copy machine. But I needed Alan to incriminate himself completely. I needed him to reveal the full scope of his plan, preferably with Lucy present so she could hear exactly what kind of man she'd married. When they arrived that evening, Lucy hugged me with what seemed like genuine affection, but I could see the concern in her eyes, concern that Alan had carefully cultivated. "You look tired, Dad. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little overwhelmed, I suppose. There seem to be so many things to keep track of these days." Alan stepped forward, his smile perfectly calibrated to convey concern and competence. "That's actually what we wanted to talk to you about, Peter. Lucy and I have been discussing your situation, and we think we might have a solution that could really help you." We sat in the living room where Eleanor's portrait watched over us from the mantel. I wondered what she would think of this moment, of the choice I was about to make. "What kind of solution?" I asked, settling into my chair with a slight wince that was only partially performative. Alan pulled out a folder, not the one containing the forged documents, but something that looked more official. "Well, first, we think you should consider moving somewhere more manageable. This apartment is a lot for one person, and the maintenance costs alone must be eating into your retirement savings." "I've been thinking about that," I lied smoothly, "though I'm not sure where I'd go. This has been my home for so long." "That's where we can help," Lucy chimed in, her voice gentle but persistent. "Alan found this wonderful assisted living community about 20 minutes from our house. It's not a nursing home. It's more like luxury apartments with services available if you need them." Alan leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with manufactured enthusiasm. "The best part is they have a buy-in program. You sell your current place, use that money to secure your spot in the community, and they take care of everything else. No more worrying about repairs, utilities, property taxes. It's perfect for someone in your situation." Someone in my situation, as if being 63 and healthy made me an invalid. "It sounds expensive," I said carefully. "Actually, that's the beauty of it. Your apartment is worth at least $400,000 in today's market. The community buy-in is only $250,000. That leaves you with a nice cushion for other expenses." I blinked slowly, pretending to process this information. $150,000 would be a nice cushion, I agreed, though I'm not sure I'm ready to make such a big decision right now. Alan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, take your time. But Peter, I have to be honest with you. Lucy and I have noticed some changes lately. Small things, but they worry us." What kind of changes?" Lucy shifted uncomfortably, but Alan pressed on. "Memory issues mostly. Repeating yourself, forgetting conversations we've had, and when I was here the other night, your office was pretty disorganized. Papers everywhere, like you'd started something but couldn't finish it." I let my face show a flicker of confusion, then embarrassment. "I don't remember leaving papers out." "That's exactly what we're talking about, Dad," Lucy said softly. "It's not your fault. These things happen as we get older. But maybe it's time to let someone else handle the complicated stuff so you can focus on enjoying your life." Alan nodded gravely, which brings me to another suggestion. I've done some research, and there are legal documents called powers of attorney that can really help in situations like this. Basically, you designate someone you trust to handle financial and legal matters when you're not feeling up to it. "Someone like you?" I asked. "Well, Lucy and I would be honored to help, if that's what you wanted. We could take care of all the details with selling the apartment, setting up your new living situation, managing your investments. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it. The trap was beautiful in its completeness. They'd constructed a narrative where every reasonable concern I might have was evidence of my incompetence, where every hesitation proved I needed their help. What they didn't know was that I'd already made my own legal arrangements. 2 weeks ago, I'd met with my real lawyer, Rebecca Martinez, and updated my will. I'd also created a revocable trust that placed all my assets beyond Alan's reach, no matter what documents he thought he had. More importantly, I'd prepared a little surprise that would reveal everything Alan thought he was hiding. I stood up slowly, as if the conversation had tired me. This is a lot to think about. Would it be possible to see some of these documents you mentioned? I'd like to look them over before making any decisions. Alan's eyes brightened. Of course. Actually, I brought some preliminary paperwork with me tonight, just in case you were interested. Nothing you need to sign right away, just something to review. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. As he handed it to me, our fingers brushed, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Triumph, satisfaction, the look of a predator who thinks he's cornered his prey. If only he knew that I was the one who'd been setting the trap all along. I'll look these over tonight, I said, clutching the folder against my chest. Thank you both for caring so much about my welfare. After they left, I sat in Eleanor's chair and opened Alan's folder. The documents were masterfully crafted forgeries, complete with official letterheads and legal language that would fool most people. They granted Alan sweeping powers over my finances, my property, even my medical decisions. At the bottom of each page was a space for my signature, along with a notary seal that I was certain had never seen the real documents. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca, it's Peter Harrison. They just delivered the forged documents. Yes, everything we discussed. How soon can you arrange the meeting? Tomorrow morning, Alan Morrison was going to discover that some games have consequences far beyond what he'd ever imagined. I called Alan the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, my voice carefully modulated to sound confused and slightly overwhelmed. Alan, I've been looking at those papers you left with me, and I'm having trouble understanding some of the language. Would it be possible for you to come over and explain them to me? Of course, Peter. I'll be right there. The eagerness in his voice was unmistakable. He thought I was ready to sign away my life. I spent the 20 minutes before his arrival preparing the apartment. The recording devices Sarah Chen had installed were all active. My laptop was open and positioned to capture everything that was about to happen. Most importantly, I'd arranged for Rebecca Martinez to arrive at exactly 10:30, giving Alan just enough time to reveal everything. When Alan walked through my door, he brought an energy I'd never seen before, confident, almost predatory. He was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his most expensive suit, as if he were closing a major business deal. How are you feeling today, Peter? You sounded a little confused on the phone. I gestured weakly toward the couch. I'm fine, just overwhelmed by all this legal language. I've never been good with complicated paperwork. Alan's smile was patronizing as he sat down and opened his briefcase. That's perfectly normal, Peter. Most people find legal documents confusing. That's why it's so important to have someone you trust help you navigate these things. He pulled out the forged power of attorney documents and spread them across my coffee table like a salesman displaying his finest wares. Now, let me walk you through this step by step. This first document gives me the authority to handle your banking and investment accounts. It's really just a safety net. You'll still have access to everything, but if you ever feel overwhelmed or forget something important, I can step in and help. I picked up the document and squinted at it, holding it close to my face as if I were having trouble reading. It says here that you'd have complete authority over all my financial accounts. That seems like a lot of responsibility for you. It might seem like a lot, but honestly, it's pretty standard. And Peter, between you and me, Lucy and I have been worried about some of the financial decisions you've been making lately. What do you mean? Alan leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering unwelcome but necessary news. Well, for instance, we noticed you've been getting calls from telemarketers, and sometimes you seem confused about whether you've already donated to certain charities. Last month, you mentioned paying the same bill twice because you couldn't remember if you'd already sent the check. None of that was true, but I nodded as if I recognized the behavior he was describing. And then there's the apartment maintenance, he continued. Lucy told me you called the same repair service 3 times last week about the same leaky faucet because you forgot you'd already scheduled the appointment. Also, completely fabricated but delivered with such conviction that even I almost believed it. I suppose I have been a little scattered lately. I said, injecting uncertainty into my voice. Maybe it would be good to have someone helping me keep track of things. Alan's eyes lit up. Exactly. And the second document deals with property management. It would give me the authority to handle the sale of your apartment and help you transition to your new living situation. I examined the second forged document, noting the careful way Alan had structured the language to give himself maximum control while making it sound like he was doing me a favor. The community you mentioned yesterday, Sunset Gardens? It really sounds lovely. It is. I actually drove by there this morning to pick up some additional brochures. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out glossy pamphlets featuring smiling elderly people playing chess and tending gardens. The waiting list is usually quite long, but I spoke with the director, and if we can get your application in by the end of this week, there might be an opening. The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. Sign now, or lose this wonderful opportunity. That's very generous of you to make those arrangements, I said. Though I have to ask, what's in this for you and Lucy? This seems like a lot of work on your behalf. For the first time, Alan's mask slipped slightly. His smile became more calculating, more honest about his motivations. Well, to be completely transparent, Peter, Lucy and I are planning to start a family soon. Having you settled somewhere safe and comfortable would give us peace of mind, and it would also free up our time to focus on our own future. The lie came so easily that I wondered how many other lies he'd told Lucy, how many manipulations she'd accepted as love. I see. And the money from selling the apartment? The extra $150,000 you mentioned, where would that go? Into a managed investment account, of course, something safe and stable that would provide you with additional income. I've already researched some excellent options, managed by him, no doubt, invested in accounts he could access whenever he needed to cover his mounting debts. I set the documents down on the coffee table and looked directly at Alan. Can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Do you think I'm losing my mind? The question caught him off guard. For a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked, and I saw the real Alan Morrison, cold, calculating, utterly without empathy. Peter, I think you're getting older, and that comes with challenges, memory issues, difficulty processing complex information, problems with organization and decision-making. None of that makes you crazy, but it does make you vulnerable. Vulnerable. There was the truth, finally spoken aloud. Vulnerable to what? To people who might take advantage of you, to making financial mistakes that could cost you everything you've worked for, to accidents or emergencies that you might not be able to handle on your own. I nodded slowly, as if I were absorbing this assessment of my capabilities. So these documents would protect me from all of that? Exactly. They'd ensure that someone who cares about you is looking out for your best interests. I picked up a pen from the coffee table and held it over the signature line of the first document. Alan's breathing actually quickened, his eyes fixed on the pen like a hawk watching prey. Before I sign these, I said slowly, I have one more question. What's that? How long have you been sleeping with Patricia Kensington? The pen clattered to the floor. Alan's face went completely white, then flushed red as the implications of my question hit him. I don't know what you're talking about. Patricia Kensington, 72 years old, widow, lives in the penthouse at Harborview Towers. You've been seeing her twice a week for the past 8 months. Usually on Tuesday afternoons and Friday evenings, when you tell Lucy you're working late. Alan stood up abruptly, his hands shaking. Peter, I think you're confused. Maybe you saw me at a business meeting and misunderstood. I have photographs, Alan. I have copies of the love letters you've been sending her. I know about the credit cards she's been paying off for you, and I know about the $50,000 loan she gave you last month to keep Morrison Events from going bankrupt. The color drained from his face completely. He sank back onto the couch, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. How long have you known? Long enough. The question is, what were you planning to do about Lucy once you got your hands on my money and Patricia's? For a long moment, Alan said nothing. Then, slowly, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undisguised hatred. You senile old fool. You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, let me tell you something about your precious daughter. She doesn't give a damn about you. She hasn't cared about you since her mother died. The only reason she puts up with your pathetic neediness is because she knows you're going to leave her money when you die. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking, but I forced myself to remain calm. Is that what you told her? That I'm needy and pathetic? I didn't have to tell her anything. She figured it out herself. Do you know what she calls you when we're alone? The burden. That's her pet name for you. The burden she inherited when her mother died. Each word was designed to cut, to destroy whatever confidence I had left. And if I really had been a confused, vulnerable old man, it probably would have worked. She agrees with this plan then? Selling my apartment, putting me in assisted living? Alan's laugh was ugly. Agrees with it? Peter, it was her idea. She's the one who suggested we might need to take more drastic action to protect you from yourself. She's the one who found the lawyer willing to prepare these documents. I just handled the details. My heart broke a little at that revelation. Not because I believed Alan completely, but because I knew there was probably some truth mixed in with his lies. Lucy had been pulled so far into his world that she might genuinely believe she was helping me. And after you get control of my assets? What happens to Lucy then? What do you think happens? She gets what she deserves for being stupid enough to trust me. The apartment door opened, and Lucy walked in carrying grocery bags and calling out cheerfully, "Dad? Alan?" "I brought ingredients for lunch. I thought we could—" She stopped abruptly when she saw Alan's face, the scattered documents on the coffee table, the tension crackling in the air. "What's going on?" Alan recovered quickly, his mask sliding back into place. "Your father's been asking some strange questions, honey. I think he's more confused than we realized." Lucy set down the groceries and looked between us, her expression concerned but not alarmed. "What kind of questions?" "He seems to think I'm having an affair with some woman named Patricia. He's making wild accusations about forged documents and financial fraud. I'm worried this might be more serious than we thought." I watched Lucy's face as she processed this information. I saw her looking at Alan with trust and love, then looking at me with pity and concern. In that moment, I understood how completely he'd isolated her from reality. "Dad," she said gently, sitting down beside me on the couch. "Alan would never do anything like that. He loves me, and he's been trying so hard to help you. Maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed by all the changes we've been discussing." I looked into my daughter's eyes and saw a stranger. Someone who'd been so thoroughly manipulated that she couldn't recognize the truth even when it was staring her in the face. "Lucy, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Alan isn't who you think he is." "Dad, please don't do this. I know change is scary, but we're trying to help you." Alan put his arm around Lucy's shoulders, a gesture that looked protective but was really possessive. "Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson, have him come take a look at your father. These kinds of paranoid delusions can be a sign of more serious cognitive decline." That's when I realized Alan wasn't just after my money. He was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, to lock me away somewhere I could never interfere with his plans again. The front door buzzer rang, interrupting the moment. I glanced at my watch. 10:30 exactly. "That'll be my lawyer," I said calmly, standing up and walking toward the intercom. "Your lawyer?" Lucy looked confused. "Dad, why would you call a lawyer?" Alan's face had gone white again. "Peter, maybe we should discuss this privately first. There might be some misunderstandings we can clear up without involving outside parties." I pressed the button to let Rebecca Martinez into the building, then turned back to face them both. "The only misunderstanding here," I said quietly, "is thinking that I'm too senile to protect myself." Alan stared at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something that looked like fear in his eyes. He was about to discover that his game was over, and mine was just beginning. Rebecca Martinez entered my apartment like a force of nature, confident, professional, carrying a briefcase that looked far more legitimate than anything Alan had brought with him. Behind her came Detective James Wright, a man in his 40s whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Rebecca said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I believe you have some documents you'd like us to examine." Lucy looked between me and the newcomers, her confusion deepening. "Dad, what's going on? Who are these people?" "Lucy, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Martinez, my attorney and Detective Wright from the Fraud Division. I've asked them here because we have some serious matters to discuss." Alan had gone completely still, but I could see his mind racing, trying to calculate his options. He glanced toward the door, then back at the detective, clearly weighing whether he could somehow talk his way out of whatever was coming. "I don't understand," Lucy said, her voice small and frightened. "Dad, you're scaring me. What kind of fraud?" Rebecca opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Ms. Morrison, your husband has been attempting to defraud your father using forged legal documents. We're here to arrest him and to ensure your father's assets are properly protected." "That's impossible," Lucy said immediately, moving closer to Alan. Alan would never do anything like that. Dad, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. I looked at my daughter, this young woman I'd raised and loved, who was now defending the man who'd been systematically destroying both our lives. The pain in my chest was sharp and immediate. Lucy, there's no misunderstanding. Alan has been planning to steal my money and property for months. He's also been having an affair with another woman, an older woman with substantial assets. You're lying. Lucy's voice cracked with emotion. Alan loves me. He would never cheat on me. Detective Wright stepped forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but we have extensive evidence of your husband's fraudulent activities. We also have documentation of his relationship with Patricia Kensington, including financial transactions between them. Alan finally found his voice. This is harassment. Peter's been showing signs of dementia for months. Ask anyone who's spent time with him recently. These are the paranoid delusions of a confused old man. Is that so? Rebecca asked coolly. She pulled out a small recording device and set it on the coffee table. Then perhaps you can explain this conversation from 20 minutes ago. She pressed play, and Alan's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. What do you think happens? She gets what she deserves for being stupid enough to trust me. Lucy's face went white. What? What is he talking about? Rebecca continued playing the recording. Alan's voice came through again. Do you know what she calls you when we're alone? The burden. That's her pet name for you. The burden she inherited when her mother died. I watched my daughter's face crumble as she heard the man she loved describing her with such casual cruelty. The betrayal in her eyes was devastating to witness. Alan, her voice was barely a whisper. Is this real? Did you really say these things? Alan looked trapped, his usual smooth confidence completely gone. Lucy, you have to understand, I was angry. He was making accusations, threatening me. I said things I didn't mean. Which part didn't you mean? Detective Wright asked. The part where you called your wife stupid, or the part where you admitted you were planning to abandon her after stealing her father's money? I want a lawyer, Alan said quickly. That's your right, the detective replied. But first, let's discuss the forged documents you brought here today. Rebecca picked up the power of attorney papers from my coffee table and examined them carefully. These are remarkably well-crafted forgeries. The letterhead, the notary seals, even the paper stock. Someone put considerable effort into making these look authentic. Or she handed them to Detective Wright, who studied them with professional interest. Mr. Morrison, can you tell us where you obtained these documents? I'm not saying anything without my lawyer present. That's fine, but I should inform you that we've already spoken with Dennis Garrett, the attorney who prepared these forgeries. He's been very cooperative in exchange for a reduced sentence. Alan's face went ashen. The trap that had taken months to construct was finally closing around him. Lucy sank into Eleanor's chair, her hands trembling as she stared at the man she'd married. I don't understand any of this. Alan, just tell me the truth. Did you forge those papers? Alan looked at her with something that might have been genuine regret. Lucy, I was desperate. My father's medical bills, the business failing. I was drowning. I thought if I could just get access to some of your father's money temporarily, I could fix everything and pay it back. So you were going to steal from my father? Not steal. Borrow. And only because I knew he had more than enough. He's been sitting on $400,000 in property value alone, plus his retirement savings. He doesn't need all that money. The entitlement in his voice was staggering. Even caught red-handed, he still believed he had the right to take what wasn't his. Rebecca Martinez opened another folder and pulled out a different set of documents. Mr. Harrison, would you like to explain to your daughter what you've actually done with your assets? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to reveal would change everything between Lucy and me forever. 3 months ago, I created a revocable trust. All of my assets, the apartment, my retirement savings, my investment accounts, have been transferred into that trust. The trust is managed by Rebecca's law firm and cannot be accessed through any power of attorney, forged or legitimate. Lucy looked confused. What does that mean? It means, Rebecca explained, that even if your father had signed legitimate documents giving your husband control over his finances, there would be nothing for him to control. The trust protects all assets from fraud, manipulation, or coercion. But what happens to the money when Dad dies? Lucy asked, and I could hear the first hint of concern for her own future in her voice. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. That depends on the terms of my will, which I updated 2 weeks ago. Lucy's eyes widened. Updated how? Your inheritance was contingent on you maintaining a relationship with me based on love and respect, not financial manipulation. Given your participation in Alan's scheme, I've had to reconsider those terms. My participation? Lucy's voice rose. Dad, I was trying to help you. Alan convinced me you were getting confused, that you needed protection. Lucy, you told him about my financial documents. You helped him identify which papers he needed to forge. You supported his plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and put in assisted living. Tears started streaming down her face. But I thought it was for your own good. I thought we were protecting you. From what? From living independently in my own home? From making my own decisions about my money and my future? Detective Wright cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. As the detective read Alan his rights, Lucy stood up abruptly. Wait. How long have you known? Dad, how long have you been planning this? I hired a private investigator 3 months ago. I've been recording conversations, documenting attempts at manipulation, and gathering evidence ever since. You've been lying to us? Pretending to be confused? I've been protecting myself from people who were trying to steal from me. Lucy stared at me as if she'd never seen me before. So all those times you seemed forgetful, when you repeated yourself or got confused about appointments, that was all an act. Not all of it. I'm 63, Lucy. I do forget things sometimes. But I'm not senile, I'm not incompetent, and I'm certainly not the helpless old man you and Alan decided I was. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking lost and broken. What happens to me now? If Alan goes to prison, if you've cut me out of your will, what am I supposed to do? The question broke my heart, because it revealed how completely dependent she'd become. The strong, independent young woman who'd wanted to be a nurse had been replaced by someone who couldn't imagine taking care of herself. You can start by deciding who you want to be, I said gently. You're 28 years old, Lucy. You're intelligent and capable. You can go back to school, build a career, create a life that belongs to you instead of someone else. But I can't afford to go back to school. I can't afford anything without Alan. Rebecca Martinez spoke up. Ms. Morrison, you should know that your husband has been receiving money from Patricia Kensington for months, money that legally belongs to the marital estate. You'll be entitled to half of those assets in the divorce proceedings. Divorce? Lucy looked stricken. I can't get divorced. I love him. Lucy, I said as gently as I could, the man you love doesn't exist. He was a character Alan created to manipulate you. The real Alan Morrison is the one you heard on that recording, the one who called you stupid and treated you like a burden. Alan, who had been silent while Detective Wright handcuffed him, suddenly spoke up. Lucy, don't listen to them. I made mistakes, but I do love you. We can work through this. She looked at him with tears streaming down her face. Do you? Do you really love me? Of course I do. Then why were you planning to leave me for Patricia Kensington? Alan's silence was answer enough, sir. As Detective Wright led Alan toward the door, Lucy called out one last question. Dad, is there anything I can do to fix this? Any way to earn back your trust? I looked at my daughter, seeing both the woman she'd become and the girl she used to be. Yes, I said quietly. You can start by learning to trust yourself. After they all left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my family. The forged documents were gone, taken as evidence. Alan was gone, facing years in prison, and Lucy was gone too, in a way. The daughter I'd raised was lost somewhere inside the woman Alan had created. But for the first time in months, I felt truly free. My assets were protected, my independence was secure, and I'd finally stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't. Eleanor's portrait watched over me from the mantel, and I could almost hear her voice. Well done, Peter. Well done. The game was over, and I had won. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind my new house, watching the morning sun filter through the leaves of the oak tree I'd planted the week after I moved in. The house was smaller than my old apartment, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a living room with large windows that looked out over the garden I was slowly creating. It wasn't the home Eleanor and I had shared, but it was mine, in a way that felt deeper and more secure than anything I'd owned before. Every decision about this place had been mine alone. From the location to the paint colors to the flowers I'd chosen for the beds along the back fence, the morning routine had become precious to me. Coffee first, black and strong, drunk while standing at the kitchen window. Then out to the garden to check on the tomatoes, the herbs, the small patch of wildflowers I'd planted because Eleanor had always loved them. Simple tasks that grounded me and reminded me that I was still capable of creating something beautiful. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message from Lucy. She'd been trying to reconnect for months now, sending messages that ranged from apologetic to angry to pleading. This one was brief. "Dad, can we please talk? I miss you." I read it twice, then put the phone away without responding. It wasn't cruelty that kept me from answering immediately, but caution. Lucy was living in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a medical clinic while she tried to figure out what came next. The divorce from Alan had been finalized last month, and she'd received her share of the money he'd taken from Patricia Kensington. Enough to get back on her feet, but not enough to avoid the hard work of rebuilding her life. I wanted to help her. Every parental instinct I had screamed at me to call her back, to invite her over, to try to bridge the gap that had opened between us. But I'd learned something important over these past months. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone find their own way back to themselves. The mailman arrived just as I was deadheading the roses. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a letter from Rebecca Martinez. I opened it standing there in the garden, surrounded by the life I'd built for myself. "Dear Peter," it read, "I wanted to update you on the final resolution of the Morrison case. Alan Morrison pled guilty to all charges and has been sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2 years. Dennis Garrett, the attorney who prepared the forged documents, received 18 months. Patricia Kensington has recovered most of her money and is not pressing additional charges. 4 years. It seemed like both too much and too little for what Alan had tried to do, but it was enough to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else for a while, and perhaps enough time for him to consider the choices that had brought him to that point." The letter continued, "I also wanted to remind you that your will and trust documents are securely filed with our office. Should you wish to make any modifications to the terms regarding your daughter's inheritance, we can schedule a meeting at your convenience." I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. Lucy's inheritance remained unchanged. She would receive everything when I died, but only if she could demonstrate that she'd rebuilt her life on her own terms, not as someone else's dependent. It was a test, perhaps, but one I hoped she'd ultimately pass. That afternoon, I drove to the farmer's market downtown. It had become a Saturday tradition, selecting fresh vegetables, chatting with the vendors, sometimes stopping for coffee at the small cafe near the courthouse, simple pleasures that had once seemed beneath my notice when I was focused on larger concerns. As I was choosing apples from a vendor's display, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Dad?" I turned to find Lucy standing there, looking uncertain and younger than her 28 years. She was wearing scrubs, the medical clinic where she worked apparently required them, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired but healthier than she had in months. "Lucy," I kept my voice neutral, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "I saw you from across the market. I wasn't following you or anything, I come here sometimes on my lunch break." We stood there for a moment, two people who shared a lifetime of history but weren't sure how to talk to each other anymore. "How are you?" I asked finally. "I'm okay. Working mostly, trying to figure things out." She paused, then added quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about learning to trust myself." "And how's that going?" A small smile crossed her face. "It's harder than I thought it would be. I spent so long letting Alan make decisions for me that I'd forgotten how to make them for myself, but I'm learning." I selected an apple and handed it to the vendor, who'd been pretending not to listen to our conversation. "What kind of decisions?" "Small ones, mostly. What to eat for dinner, which route to take to work, whether to sign up for evening classes at the community college." She paused. "I've been thinking about going back to nursing school." That sparked something in my chest. Pride, hope, relief. "That's good, Lucy. That's very good." "I wanted to ask you something," she said, her voice becoming more tentative. "Would it be okay if I called you sometimes? Not asking for anything, just talking." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd become so wary of. But what I saw was genuine uncertainty. A young woman trying to reconnect with her father without crossing boundaries she was only beginning to understand. "You can call me," I said carefully. "But Lucy, I need you to understand something. I can't go back to the way things were before Alan. I can't pretend that didn't happen. I know. I don't want to go back either. I want to go forward, but I'd like you to be part of that if you're willing." We walked together toward the parking area, not saying much but comfortable in the silence. When we reached my car, Lucy hesitated. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "What's that?" "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" "Really forgive me, not just say you do?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. The rational part of me understood that Lucy had been manipulated, that Alan's psychological control had been subtle and effective. But the emotional part of me still felt the sting of betrayal, the knowledge that my own daughter had been willing to have me declared incompetent and locked away. "I think forgiveness is something that happens gradually," I said finally. "Not all at once, but little by little, as you show me who you're becoming." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I can live with that. I mean, it's more than I deserve. Lucy, everyone deserves a chance to start over, even you." After she left, I drove home through streets that had become familiar and comforting. The house welcomed me back with its quiet rooms and the garden that was slowly taking shape under my care. I made dinner, nothing elaborate, just a grilled chicken breast and vegetables from the farmer's market. I ate while reading a mystery novel I'd picked up at the library, something I hadn't had time for when my life was consumed with protecting myself from Alan's schemes. As the sun set, I took my coffee out to the small patio I'd built behind the kitchen. The garden was still young, but I could see what it would become. A place of peace and growth, somewhere I could tend to living things and watch them flourish. My phone rang just as the first stars were becoming visible. It was Margaret, calling from Denver. "Peter, how are you, dear? I've been thinking about you." "I'm well, Margaret, really well. You sound different, lighter somehow." I smiled, looking out over my garden. "I feel lighter, free, I suppose." "And Lucy, any word from her?" "I saw her today, actually. She's doing better, working, considering going back to school." "That's wonderful. Do you think you two will be able to work things out?" "Maybe, in time. She needs to find herself first, and I need to trust that she can do that." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness and thought about the choices that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been living in fear, pretending to be confused and helpless while I gathered evidence against a man who wanted to steal my life. Now I was genuinely at peace, living simply but comfortably, surrounded by the things I'd chosen rather than the things others had imposed on me. The apartment where Eleanor and I had been so happy was someone else's home now. I'd sold it 2 months after Alan's arrest, using the money to buy this house and invest the rest in a way that would provide security without making me a target for future manipulation. Eleanor's portrait sat on my mantel here too, but in this house it felt less like a shrine and more like a blessing. She would have liked this place, I thought. She would have loved the garden and the quiet evenings and the sense that I was finally living life on my own terms. Before going inside for the night, I checked my phone one more time. No new messages from Lucy, but I wasn't disappointed. She was learning to give me space, to respect the boundaries I'd set. That restraint was more valuable than any amount of desperate pleading would have been. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. Tomorrow I would work in the garden again, maybe drive to the nursery to pick out some fall flowers to plant. Simple plans that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without worrying about what someone else might be planning for my future. I'd protected what was mine, set boundaries that couldn't be crossed, and chosen peace over the exhausting work of maintaining relationships that had been built on manipulation rather than love. The game was over, and I had won. Not through anger or revenge, but through the quiet strength of knowing my own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. In the morning, my garden would be there waiting for me, growing a little each day under my care, just like the new life I was building, one choice at a time.